experience because he actually started out as a police officer, went into the military, became a lawyer through the military, it's what we call a JAG, and then came back to Guam and worked for the Attorney General's office, and then now works as a public defender. So he's been on all sides of the law, all right? So please give him a nice warm welcome, ask him questions, and don't be shy, all right? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meno, for inviting me. And if you don't mind, I do want to talk about my professional experience, but I also want to kind of make this a little bit more personal as well, because I was once in your shoes, you know, at your age, and I felt like the world was tough, and I felt like there was challenges, and I felt like the world was against me, and that I had no future. But you know, that's just part of growing up and becoming an adult. So before I get into my professional experiences, I was also a magistrate judge. So that was a very short stint, but it was very eye-opening. But before I get into that, I want to share a little bit of my personal life. I don't normally share this about myself, but and I hope I don't bore you, but I hope that sharing what I went through growing up would give some hope and help you guys as well, you know, because I always like to pay it back. There have been a lot of people in my life that have helped guide me because I needed it, right? When I was born, before I was 2 years old, my father had to leave the island, right? And he never came back. So I don't remember him. So I was raised by a single mother. She was 15 when she gave birth to me, right? But my grandparents, of course, stepped in to help. The house that we lived in had no indoor plumbing. It was, we had a hose on a piece of wood outside. That's where we showered. And then our bathroom was an outside bathroom, right? That was down in Agate. We moved up to Barragata, and it was the same thing. We moved into another house where there was no indoor plumbing, and our bathroom or our shower was a hose out the back door. All right. So coming from that experience, growing up, I was on welfare, food stamps, Section 8, free lunch. So I grew up angry. I grew up mad. I grew up like, wow, how come everybody else has things? Why do I have to be poor? And why do I have to get teased at school? And why do I have to wear hand-me-downs? You know? But throughout that time, I had good people in my life, my uncles, teachers, you name it, that would help every little bit here and there. Buy me a lunch pail, buy me, you know, clothes for school. Those are the kind of things I remember growing up, right? But growing up in that way, you kind of feel like you have no chance in life, right? Like the world is against you. You're not going to be one of those kids in high school that has a car or going to get your college paid for you, right? I always felt like, my gosh, other people have it so lucky, and I got the short end of the stick. I felt that way for a very, very long time. But, you know, after I graduated high school, which I didn't even think I was going to graduate from high school, I was just coasting along, you know, hanging out with my friends, and no real purpose or direction in life. So I just got lucky and I had enough credits to graduate, right? And so after that, I didn't know what I was going to do. I applied everywhere. I worked at installing typhoon shutters. I worked at a hotel at a front desk. I worked at bussing tables, you know, and I was just trying to earn money just to feed myself and to help take care of my grandmother because she was getting sick already. And then, you know, one of those applications called and said, hey, you know, you applied. Are you still interested? and it happened to be, and this is right out of high school, right? It happened to be the Guam Police Department. And I never wanted to be a cop. I didn't grow up, playing cowboys and Indians and wanting to be a cop or something like that. I just accepted it because it paid a lot, right? And so I went in, graduated from the police academy, and turns out I liked it. I liked, helping people. I liked being a police officer. I liked enforcing the law. So one of my mentors in the police department, and that's important, is you got to find mentors. They're going to find you. Don't chase them away. Don't ignore them. When they offer their help and their guidance, that's very valuable. It means that they care about you. They're not getting paid to help you and advise you. They're helping you and advising you because they see something in you and they care about you, right? So anyways, I had a mentor in the police department, and she kind of forced me to apply for what's called the Pedro Doc Sanchez Scholarship Program, which will pay for a bachelor's degree at the University of Guam. And I applied and I got accepted, not because I'm great or smart or anything like that. It's just because there were 4 positions available and only 2 people applied. So by default, the 2 people, we got it. So I got my bachelor's degree, in the police, while I was a police officer. And then the Army knocked on my door and said, "Hey, you're about to graduate. Do you want to commission into the Army?" So when you go into the Army, you can either be an enlisted person or you can be an officer. Officers, they're more sort of like the management, right? The enlisteds, they're more like, they call them grunts, right? And so I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good, deal. And then also officers get paid a lot more. So again, I said, let me try this, right? And I did that. And that was right before 9/11, and September 11, 2001. I commissioned in June. And so what happened there was, of course, right after I commissioned, I was in basic training, and then 9/11 happened. So then they sent all of us to war. I went 3 times back-to-back combat deployments. And so couldn't get out of the military at that time because it was stop loss, stop move. Once they lifted that, I said, I'm going to go back to Guam. I'm tired of this. I didn't sign up to go to war 3 times in a row, right? But they said, okay, well, what can we do to make you stay? And I said, well, what can you offer? They offered a choice of assignment. They offered to go to school to get a master's degree in any subject I wanted, and then go be a professor at the U.S. Military Academy, or they offered law school. And so I took law school, right? And then as soon as I was able to come out or to leave the Army, because when they send you to school, you owe them time, right? So as soon as I was able to get out in 2015, I came back home and I became a prosecutor, and then did that for 5 years, and then went on to be a defense attorney. But I also want to share that when I was a teenager, remember I said I was going through a lot of things, right? I was in the juvenile system myself twice. I had 2 cases, right? Once I was driving without I had my permit, but I didn't have a driver with me. So they caught me. They gave me community service. I did 200 hours of community service at the church, right? And the other time was when I got into a fight with my mom's significant other at the time, and they kicked me out of the house. And out of anger, I picked up a rock and I threw it at her car, and it damaged her car. That was a one-time thing. I went through anger management. I did community service, so on and so forth. But, I get it. There are times when the world seems like it's against you, and to get kicked out of your house for somebody else, right? That's a lot to go through. It's a lot to, and I was angry for a long time. And like I said, it took a long time for me to deal with that. But so that's my personal history. And I hope that hearing that, it can resonate with some of you guys, and maybe, you know, help you out a little bit. I just want to, the message is, no matter what we're going through in life, things can always get better. And it's about our own resilience and our own perspective and our own attitude. And those are the things that I had to learn throughout, life from different mentors and stuff, because I have a positive outlook now on life, but it wasn't always that way. I was angry and I was mad and I was lost, and I didn't know what I didn't have a plan for life. And so even to this day, none of the things that I've done in life has ever been planned. It's always just been opportunities that presented itself, and it's up to you whether or not to take it. All right. So here on Guam, back in the 80s when I grew up, things were a lot different. I grew up in Santa Rita. We knew all the officers. We knew all the police officers, right? And you weren't afraid to talk to them, and you didn't run away when they rolled up, because some of them are your relatives. But even if they weren't your relative, you knew them, right? I know nowadays, with all the things that are going on in the news and with the police department, like today, I was just looking at an article about that police brutality case, right? There's an old man that says that he got beat up by 3 police officers. So you never heard of things like that back in the 80s and the 70s when I was born in the 70s, but in the 80s and the 70s, you never heard of things like that. So policing today, I don't know if I would want to be a police officer, but we do need good police officers on Guam. There's always a shortage. If you decided to be a police officer, that's job security. You'll never, as long as you don't break the law, right? You'll always have a job as a police officer, and it pays good. It pays the bills, but more importantly, you're providing a service to the public, right? We need good police officers out there. Not to say that the police department is supposed to be the ones that raises this island, right? It starts at home, and our family system, our family network, our support network, that's really who should be shaping and raising our children nowadays. It shouldn't be the police, but we still need good police officers. We need police officers that are going to be there to provide help when it's needed. I have a lot of good friends to this day that are lifetime police officers, and those guys have dedicated their entire lives to serving the community. Luckily, I have never had to take someone's life in the line of duty, but I know some officers who have, and that's a very big, huge responsibility to do that, right? Some of you guys may be familiar with the Jojo Garcia case, right? He was the guy that went in, and there was an active shooter in 2001 over at Seventh-day Adventists. So Jojo is the guy that went in and had to put him down. There were, I think, 7 people that he had killed, right? Not to be morbid, right? But that's the kind of thing when you sign up to be a police officer, right? Those are the kind of things that are possible. That's not an everyday thing. It's a once in a lifetime kind of thing, but it's definitely possible, right? So it's a very honorable thing to be a police officer, because you're there to protect the innocent. You're there to protect those that need help, right? You're there to arrest and investigate crimes against a lot of vulnerable victims. When I was a police officer, the thing that bugged me the most was crimes against our manamko, our elderly, right? Because they're defenseless. And then also crimes against children, the very, very vulnerable. Those were the cases for me that really, I can still remember some of those cases like it was just yesterday, right? And I will forever be proud of the fact that I served and I helped when, it was my duty to help, but that is a very honorable thing to do. So if any of you guys are thinking about being a police officer, like I said, I had no inclination to be a police officer. It just was an opportunity that presented itself. But having been through it, I can say to you guys that it is a very, very honorable profession, right? So if that's something that you guys were thinking about, then the police department and other law enforcement agencies on Guam always need good people, right? There's the port police, there's the airport police, there's the park police. There's just a need. There's always going to be a need on Guam for something like that. And if that's something you guys are thinking of doing, I say, kudos to you. We need it. We need more good people to do that, right? To do that kind of thing. And military service is also not a bad thing. There's no higher service or no higher calling than to defend and protect your country or your community in the case of the police department, right? So having served in the military, I've met a lot of great people from Guam, Chamorro and non-Chamorro, and we have a very great reputation in the military. When someone knows that you're from Guam, whether you're Chamorro or not, they expect great things from you. They expect you to be high speed. They expect you to be squared away. They expect you to be awesome. That's the reputation that Islanders have, right? Going into the military. And it's such a great experience. You get trained and you get to experience a lifestyle and a culture that is it's hard to describe, but it's just very fulfilling, and it's also very helpful to your personal life, in your relationships in life, and in how you carry yourself around in life, because they teach you discipline, they teach you honor, respect, and leadership. And so those are things that is very good to practice and to have in your life. And it helps with your family and your relationships if you get that kind of character and values that you can use in your life, in your everyday life. But that is something that is instilled in you in the military. Not to say that families don't instill that already, but look around. There's a lot of problems in our island, and I think, to me personally, one of the reasons why we have so many problems is a lack of discipline, a lack of respect, a lack of values, right? Doing the right thing, integrity. One person told me, one of my mentors, the same mentor that made me apply for the college scholarship, she said to me, "You have to do the right thing even when nobody's looking, because you yourself will still know, and you can never escape yourself," right? So that, when I heard that, when she said that to me, I was like, wow, that's heavy. Because a lot of people, right, when they think no one's looking, they'll choose to do the wrong thing. I never thought about it like that. Like, well, even though there's nobody watching me right now, I'm gonna know that I stole that watch, or that I spit in someone else's drink or something like that. Whatever it is, whether it's serious or trivial, right? No matter what, you're still gonna know. And the point is, are you going to be able to live with that? Are you going to be able to live with knowing that you didn't do the right thing? You chose to do the wrong thing. And that's all it really is, right? About morality and integrity is, we have choices in life. Do we choose to do the right thing, or do we choose to do the wrong thing, right? And it doesn't matter if someone's looking or not, because we will still know. we ourselves will still know. So I know I talk a lot and I talk fast. So if there's anyone that has any questions, just raise your hand. I'll stop talking in a few minutes after I'm done talking about lawyering, and then we can have a more of a dialogue, more of a discussion. So again, like I said, I was getting ready to get out of the military and come back home to Guam and go be a police officer again, is what I was planning at the time. And the opportunity presented itself. They said, oh, we'll send you to law school. So I went to law school at University of Washington in Seattle. And again, it was a very eye-opening thing to do that. I'm 50 years old now, but I still try to learn every day, and I learn something new every day. Like yesterday, I learned, anyone knows what's mansanan pautaki? Those small little crab apples. I had no idea. I've eaten that since I was a little kid. I had no idea they call it jujube. Jujube is like a flavor of ice cream, or it's a, but I know what jujube is, but I never knew that mansanan pautaki was jujube. So that's something I just learned yesterday, So the point of that little story is that we're lifetime learners, I've been taking training, even after law school, and I'm going to training later this month, right? The point is, we have to continue to expand our minds. We have to continue to learn. Once you're done with high school or college, you don't stop learning. You continue to learn throughout the rest of your life. Even your teachers, they have development trainings that they have. They have, they pursue higher education. So I got a little sidetracked there about schooling, because I love school, right? Even though I'm 50 years old now, I still want to learn. I still feel that there's so much out there in the world that I don't know and I want to learn about, right? And I also teach, and I try as much to learn from my students, because my students are the ones that are younger and they're coming up and they know, the slang words that I don't know, I want to be able to communicate with my kids, but I can't communicate with them because they're talking a different language, And so anytime I get a chance to interact with my younger students, I try to listen to them and hear what they're saying, and then I stop them and say, okay, explain to me, what is no cap? So these are things I didn't know growing up. But anyways, so now about the law. Okay. The law is a set of rules created by a society and is supposed to be a reflection of that society, right? And the lawyers and the judges, we're the ones who have to deal with the law when it becomes an issue, whether it's a lawsuit because people are disagreeing about a contract, or it's a criminal trial because someone is accused of committing a crime, so on and so forth, right? And so that's what a lawyer is basically. It's just someone who's trained in the law and whose profession is to, as they say, practice law. And in doing so, they assist their clients, whether it's a paid client or not a paid client, but we advocate for them based on the rule of law, based on the laws that exist. And so to me, that has been such a very fulfilling experience. It's very interesting. When I lose a case, and that's a term of art, because I don't believe I ever lose. I still believe, even if the case turned out against me, I still believe it's a win, because I've learned and we've tested the law, right? And you go to a case or a trial, or it could be a motion hearing or whatever, right? Because there's legal issues that we're arguing about. One party believes that the law says this, and another party believes that the law says something else. And so then there's a judge there in the court to decide, okay, whose argument will prevail. And whether I prevail in the argument or not, I still believe that I win because I've learned, and I've practiced in the law. It's a very, some people like playing sports, right? And for lawyers, the courtroom is their coliseum or their stadium, and they go in and it's sort of like a sport. But the thing with law is that there's more things at stake than a championship title. Sometimes someone can go away to jail for the rest of their lives, right? And where it becomes really important, I believe, is when someone is actually innocent and they're facing a boatload of incarceration, and they're innocent, but it could be because of a mistaken identity, or it could be because someone is actually lying about what happened, right? There's a lot at stake. It's not just a championship ring or, there's a lot at stake when we go into trial, a criminal trial, and we battle it out, so to speak, in trial. And so for me right now, that's, I believe, the best thing right now that I could be doing at this stage in my life. I got here to where I'm at just by pure accident and by pure chance. None of this was by design. And so, I look at you guys and I say, wow, I was in their shoes at one point in time. I had no idea where my life was going to go, I just didn't. I even one point in time thought I was going to be a priest. I thought I heard my calling to go and be a priest. But then I met someone in 8th grade, and I was like, okay, no, maybe I'm not going to be a priest. Because I asked her to be my girlfriend. But she said no. And then I think like the next 3 girls also said no. But you don't give up, right? The point is you don't give up. You keep trying. Finally, eventually someone said yes, right? So, but anyways, are there any questions?
I know you're running for Attorney General.
I heard that too, yes.
We've seen how the current Attorney General has tackled homelessness, right? With his, his homeless ghost, his Pan Busters
Mm-hmm.
campaign. How would you attack homelessness as an AG?
So let's clarify that a little bit. The AG has launched a Pan Busters campaign. I don't believe it's actually targeted at helping the homeless. There were 2 initiatives that he did that addressed that group of people. One is to remove them from their encampment sites, right? And 2 was to stop them from panhandling. Again, to be clear, it's not trying to help them. What happens is, or what I know is, that people whisper into his ear and say, I don't like this, I don't like that, you need to do something about this. And he reacts. And that's what he did. Someone said, hey, you need to do something about those encampments. You need to do something about these panhandlers. And that's exactly what he did. He also started on something else, right? Someone said, you got to do something about potholes. You remember that? He said, oh, I'm going to arrest the right. He wanted to arrest for official misconduct because they tear up the roads and then they don't patch it back correctly, right? And that's as a result of somebody whispering into his ear saying, oh my God, the roads are terrible. You need to do something about this. And so he wrote a letter to the director of public works and said, if you don't fix the roads, we're going to arrest you for official misconduct, right? Okay. So I just wanted to step back and clarify his approach and his intention. He got backlash from the public saying that, he's picking on the homeless. So that's when he turned around and said, Governor, you got to do something about the homeless, right? His intent was never to help the homeless. His intent was to get rid of those encampments and to stop panhandling, which, by the way, is not illegal, but it is legal to panhandle. As long as you have a permit and as long as you do it, between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. and as long as you're wearing a vest. You don't even have to have a reason. It doesn't need to be for raising money for cancer or raising money for fire department or whatever. You don't have to have a reason at all. You just have to have that permit from the chief of police. You have to not do it after 6 p.m. and you have to have a vest, right? And then there's, of course, you can't be aggressive, right? You can't go and threaten someone, give me $1 or I'll, crack your windshield. That's aggressive panhandling. That's illegal, right? That's already not even panhandling, that's extortion, right? But anyways, getting back to that, the question is, what do I think about how he was handling it? He's not addressing homelessness. Get that clear. That's not what his intent was. That was only a reaction to the criticism that he got. It was like, hey, well, Governor, these are homeless people that are doing this, so do something to help the homeless. All right? Not knowing that homelessness is a complex problem. You know that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink, right? That's what we're dealing with. There are substance abuse issues. There are mental health issues. There are all kinds of issues that are challenges for people in that position, right? And so it's not as easy as, here's $3,000 a month, go rent a house, right? It's not as easy as that. It's not as easy as, here's a homeless shelter, come here and stay here, right? It's not as easy as that. It is a human problem, and that, like I said, to be clear, that was not what he was addressing. He only responded that way because people were saying he hates poor people and he hates homelessness. So his response was, hey, Governor, this is your thing. You need to be doing something about it. Not knowing that they are doing something about it. It's just that it's not a simple solution. Okay? They need to continue to do what they're doing, providing those services and support to folks that need it, right? They may even need to step it up a notch, but it's not like they aren't doing anything at all. It's not like they're ignoring the problem. And it is a very difficult problem to solve, right? It's like saying, hey, Governor, cancer is bad. You better cure it now, right? Governor, why aren't you curing cancer? Right? It's not that simple. You can't just snap your finger or throw $1 billion at it and it goes away. It doesn't go away, right? And so that's my response. Did you ask what would I do differently?
Yeah. If you were the AG, how would
Well, that's not the AG's.
Yeah.
That's not the AG's lane. Yeah, I would. They already have the services there. I wouldn't villainize them.
Yeah, you wouldn't get
Yeah.
to that thing.
Well, that, but also you gotta go into one of the things I was thinking about just today, was we can't solve problems if we don't understand the problem, right? And there's some people that don't want to understand the problem. They just look at an issue and say, oh, here's an opportunity for me to grab headlines. Here's an opportunity for me to fan the flames of fear and hatred, right? And that's what politicians do. And I believe that's what he does as a politician. The Attorney General's office, by the way, everyone, is not a political position. It's nonpartisan, it's non-political. It's elected, but that's all. It's elected. The Attorney General has two Now we're talking about the role of the Attorney General. Has two roles based on, one, the Organic Act, and two, a Guam statute. Under the Organic Act, the Attorney General is the chief legal officer for the government of Guam, not the people of Guam, the government of Guam. So he's supposed to provide legal advice, legal support, legal representation to government agencies. His second hat is under Guam statute. It's a one sentence thing, and it's very, very short. It says the Attorney General shall have cognizance over all criminal prosecutions. That's all it says. What does that mean? It just means that he's the guy that's overall in charge of criminal prosecutions, right? And so that's his two functions. One is to support the government of Guam, and two, to prosecute crimes. And if he's conflicted, then he can appoint a special prosecutor to on a case-by-case basis, right? So that's really the role of the Attorney General. Not to go bulldozing homeless encampments. And by the way, he doesn't have legal authority to issue, his investigators don't have legal authority to issue citations to panhandlers, because it's very clear in the statute. There's only 3 people that are allowed: Guam police officers, Guam police reserves, and CAPE volunteers. And there's no more CAPE right now. The CAPE program is the community policing program is right now dormant. It's not that it went away or it got abolished. It's just that there's no one in it, right? But those are the only three legal people. Airport police cannot issue panhandling. Park police cannot issue panhandling. And neither can Port Authority of Guam police. None of them. Park rangers, conservation officers, they're all law enforcement officers. But under Guam law, they are not one of the 3 that are permitted to do it. It says very clearly in the statute, there's only 3 types of people that can do it. And unfortunately, he's wrong on a lot of things, and he just does whatever he wants to do, and it just waits to if someone's going to do anything about it. And a lot of times, nobody does anything about it. But anyways, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I wanted to ask another one. So I know he got elected in because of his, when he was campaigning, he said he was going to be tough on crime. And our previous AG, we saw was very soft, I think, on crime. And that's the reason why I think Moylan was able to get
Right,
in.
right. Can I shed some light on that?
I don't know if, he's come off as saying that he's going to be tough on crime, but I don't really know if that's the case, because I don't really see a difference in the crime rate.
Right.
When he got elected. As the AG, how would you approach that?
Well, let me put this into context first. So, you know that saying, perception is reality, right? And unfortunately, that's very true. Here on Guam, who creates our perception? The media, right? The media creates our perception, and then it becomes our reality because we think that that's the truth, right? That's what that means. Perception is reality. So anyways, under Levin, he was losing a lot of prosecutors, right? And therefore, and losing a lot of cases. And then, like you said, Ms. Meno, that Doug campaigned on being tough on crime. The issue is, I think he really wants to be tough on crime. The problem is, he chased away 80% of not just prosecutors. Under Levin, the prosecutors were the ones leaving. Under Doug, it was everybody. They have shut down a couple of divisions at the AG's office. There's nobody there. There's absolutely nobody there. Consumer protection, non-existent, right? That's a division that is required by law to be. So you know what he does is he takes the guy at civil and says he's leader of civil division / consumer protection. But that's just on paper. In reality, there is no consumer protection right now. And the law on Guam says the AG's office has to have a consumer protection division, but they just don't have the bodies, right? They don't have the number of attorneys. So we went from the frying pan into the fire. So comparing the two, it's worse. It's exacerbated because of the lack of people, but not only that, the lack of people, but the lack of skilled or trained people, because we're getting all these people from off island that, you can't just come here and then 2 weeks later, you're a fully functioning, prosecutor. It takes anywhere between a year to 2 to 3 years for you to get up to speed on how things are done here at the Superior Court. And so we're seeing a lot of acquittals, a lot of crashes and burning. We're seeing, there's over 600 dismissals since Doug sat down, right? But he's not going to put that out there, of course. He's going to try to hide that fact. So what I would do different is, like the phoenix, you're going to have to rise from the ashes. I already have quite a number of folks that said they would come back to the AG's office, not necessarily if I'm there, but anyone but the current AG. If anyone other than him is there, they'll go back, right? But if the question was specifically what would I do different is, I believe that you have to train. You have to have a competent team of lawyers. And you can't have that if, one, you don't have enough lawyers, or two, even if you have enough lawyers, you don't train them properly, right? And so when I was there under Elizabeth Barrett Anderson, they had an active attorney training program. She recognized that when people come in to Guam, it doesn't matter if you've been practicing 25 years somewhere else. You're not ready to step into court and practice. You have to be brought up to speed. You have to be trained on our laws, on our procedures, on our case law here on Guam. And that takes a minimum of a year, right? So the ultimate goal is to have a competent team, but then, as I was taught in the military, you have to plan backwards from that. Okay, what are the milestones to get to your end goal, which is to have a competent team, right? You have to start, there's baby steps that you got to make take before you get to running, and then, basically rebuild it and make it into a well-oiled machine. When I was up there was a lot of old, prosecutors that had been there for years, some of them over decades. And I'll tell you what, we were very, very efficient and successful under Elizabeth Barrett Anderson, because she knew that, one, you had to support the division. Two, you couldn't interfere with them. You had to give them discretion and autonomy, right? You don't go in there with your own personal agenda and say, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. And so what happened was, that's what he did. He said, I want this, 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 and this. And then when they pushed back at him and said, that's kind of illegal. We can't do that. That's against the rules. He was like, get out. I'll find someone who will do it, right? And so 75% of the people left, right? They're all over the place now. A lot of them are at public defender. A lot of the lawyers are at GPA, at GWA, at the hospital, at DOE, you name it. So not only did he do a forced homeless relocation program, he also did a forced attorney relocation program, because all the attorneys that knew what they were doing and wanted to follow the rules were either sent packing or said, I ain't going to be a part of this. I am not going to do this. this is illegal, this is wrong, this is bad. I'm risking my law license by just being here. And so they left, right? And so that's really what's going on. But you know, that's what people from the inside know and see. But the general public, when you see the billboards, what's the latest billboards? 50 trial wins, right? That's not real. That's not true. One of those trials was my trial. He had 8 serious charges, acquitted on all 8 charges. And he got convicted on a lesser included misdemeanor. He was facing 80 years, and now he's facing 60 days. But because it was a conviction, he's going to plaster it on the billboard saying, look, we won, we won. That's like going to a football game. One team got 100 points and another team got 2 points, but the guy that got the 2 points saying, I won, right? Because I got my 2 points. I only lose if I get 0. That's, you know, and so you be the judge. Is that really a win, right? When someone was facing 80 years and now he gets 60 days, did you really win? That's a matter, you know, people that want to support him say, yeah, that's a win. That's a total win, right? But everybody else knows the truth. But anyways, yet another question? I have a question for the students. Anyone here thinking about being a police officer? Yes, sir. Do it. You know, go talk to police officers. Talk to anyone that, you know, will give you guidance. And then figure out what you need to do and then do it. Because they're not going to come knocking on your door, right? I still had to apply. The police didn't just come to me and said, hey, we know you didn't apply, but do you want to do this? I still had to apply, and they said, do you want to do it? And I said, yes. So the first step, of course, is to apply. Yes.
What's the process?
So you go to DOA, you get an application. It's just like any government, you know, you have to get your clearances, you have to submit your certificates or whatever, whether it's a GED or a diploma, high school diploma or whatever, you know, you have to do all that. And then they'll call you. Unlike other government jobs, you know, other government jobs, you do have to do a drug test, so on and so forth. But in the police department, you also have to pass a background check, a psychological check, and a lie detector. You know, funny story, and I was 17 when I joined, right? And I had a girlfriend at the time. She was older than me. I was 17, she was 18. But the question in the lie detector test was, within the last 5 years, have you had sex with a girl age 16 or younger? And so I thought about it and I was like, yeah. And they're like, what? Yeah? What are you talking about? I said, I'm 17. I've been dating my girlfriend for 3 years, you know. So you do the math. So that question was more designed for older guys, not for 17-year-olds, right? The other thing you have to pass is a physical obstacle course. You have to pass the obstacle course, you know. And then once you get into the police department, everyone has to do patrol, right? That's a rite of passage. You're not going to go straight into being a SWAT guy, or you're not going to go straight into being a detective, right? You have to do your time out on patrol, but there's a lot of different opportunities in the police department. If you like crime scenes, right? You can be under the forensic science division. They test drugs. They test chemicals and bodily fluids, and they process crime scenes. There's that. If you like traffic investigations, there's the highway patrol division, right? If you like, there's juvenile investigations, there's narcotics, there's of course SWAT, and then there's of course criminal investigations, which they're the ones that investigate like homicides and robberies and really serious crimes. So when I was in the police department, I tried being at criminal investigations and also at highway patrol. And then, of course, like I said, regular patrol. But there's just so much opportunity and different areas of interest that you can go into when you're in the police department. And even in the military as well. So, is anyone here thinking about being a lawyer? See, the problem with me, that's good. The problem with me is that I have big family on Guam, and almost every day I get called. Hey, I need help. You know, everything from a probate matter to a lawsuit, and even, you know, asking me to defend them in criminal trials. So it's good. It's good. It's nice to be able to help folks, and I do help a lot of people off the record, you know, because sometimes the solution to their problem is not going to court. Sometimes it's just, you know, guiding them, giving them the correct information, informing them about the law so that they can comply with the law or what needs to get done, right? It's not always like what you see in Law and Order Special Victims, right? It's not. I don't spend every day in court at trial. I do maybe 2 or 3 trials a month. The rest of the time, it's sitting at my desk, writing a bunch of motions, meeting with clients, just a lot of face-to-face talking with people about their issues and their problems and helping them solve that. So being a lawyer is also very fulfilling. You know, they call you a counselor because that's what you do, is you counsel them on a bunch of different things, but mostly the law. All right. So, yes. Okay, there's a bunch, but for me, the most memorable moments are when people thank me later. So there was a kid, I still remember it, up there at by GCC. There's this, you know, those apartments by GCC. So I got called because this guy, he was 16 years old, and he was beyond control. That's one of the things that they call beyond control, when the parents just want them taken out of the house because they're not listening, they don't want to do anything. It's known as beyond control. You take them to DYA, right? So anyways, I went over to the house and I asked the boy, why are you not listening to your parents? You know, what I was initially told was that the fight started because they told him to take out the trash and he didn't want to, right? And so I started talking to him and said, well, what's really going on? This can't be about taking out the trash, you know. That was just, you know, picking at the scab. There's something deeper. So he said, you know, that he was mad at his stepfather because the stepfather, remember, this is back then, there's no cell phones or whatever, unplugged the phone at 8 p.m. because, you know, he was on the phone with the girlfriend, this and that, not doing his homework, not doing stuff. And so the stepfather unplugged the phone and took the phone into the house, into his room, and put it in his drawer, right? It's the physical phone, remember? Everyone remember that? The one with the dial, right? So that was really what he was angry about. But when they told him to take out the trash, and his rebellion was, no, you take out the trash, right? And that's what started the headbutting. So I sat there and I talked with him for probably 2 hours. And, you know, I told him, hey, you're 16 years old. You're living here. There's air conditioning. There's food. There's clean clothes. You know, you can't be like that, right? And I'm sure I'm not the first one that told that to him. But it's different when it's your dad telling you that, right? Versus someone else telling you. So it just matters. It matters sometimes who the messenger is, not necessarily what the message is, but who is the messenger, right? And so I said, "You good? No more arguing with your parents?" So we left. I left, right? But I spent a good 2 hours there just talking to him, and he was telling me all these things, just releasing. What I figured out later is that he just needed someone to listen to him. He just needed someone to talk to him, right? Hear him, right? And so a couple years later, I see his parents at a party, and they come up to me and they say, "Hey, do you remember me?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I remember you guys, right? You're the guy with the boy that was giving you trouble." And they said, "Yeah, guess what? He just graduated. He's in the military now. He got married. They have a baby on the way. He's doing great." And I said, "Oh, that's good news." And they said to me, "I don't know what you did to him in that room that night, but from that day forward, he was straight as an arrow. Never talked back, no, this and that, right?" And so I was like, but it's that kind of, those are some of the most memorable things, right? When people express their gratitude and appreciation for helping them, for the help. And that's why I like to help people is not because I'm getting paid for it, but it's because I'm actually helping. I remember in my physics class in the 12th grade, my physics teacher had this poster on the board. It said, "Success is knowing that at least one person has breathed easier because you lived," right? At least one person that you help to make their life easier. If you've done that in life, then that is success. But of course, I've been able and lucky and fortunate enough to help many, many more people than that. And so that's one of the most memorable things. Another one is, unfortunately, it's memorable because they're bad. A lot of the death investigations that I did, it's something that, you'll never forget. You'll never forget those things. So one's a good memorable one, one's a bad memorable one. Yeah, positive and negative, right? But that's the way life is, right? We cannot know the beauty of the sunshine if we're in the sunshine all day. I mean, all the time. Unless you've known what it is to be in the dark, you're not going to appreciate what it is to be in the sunshine, right? And the same thing with sadness and happiness. We don't know true happiness. We'll be like Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Just dumb and ignorant and happy, but they don't know what they're missing, because they never experience pain until Eve decided to bite the apple, right? You guys remember that band? You guys are too young here, but you guys remember that band called Blame Adam on Guam? Yeah. And I asked the band members, I was like, because it's an all-female band, and I was like, why'd you guys name yourself Blame Adam? They said, because everybody blames Eve. It wasn't Eve's fault, it was Adam's fault, right? So, anyways. So, as far as wanting to be a lawyer, there is no law school on Guam, and there has been exploration of opening a law school in Guam. In the 1990s, it was estimated that if UOG opened up a law school at the University of Guam, back then in the 90s, it was going to cost $33 million just to open a law school. And the question was, okay, even if we open it, right, and get all the faculty and the dean that's necessary in the library, because that's part of being a law school. You have to have a good law library, right? Is whether or not it'll be sustainable. And the thought was yes, because a lot of Korean and Japanese students want to go to American law schools, and they do. When I was in Seattle, I had a ton of Koreans and Japanese. And so, it would be closer for them to go to, but at the end of the day, too, is it going to be sustainable, right? We just didn't know. It was one of those unknown things. And so, of course, we couldn't get $33 million in the 90s, so we never did open a law school. But that would be something interesting. But the other thing is that I know students now that have gone to law school. They still have to have a bachelor's degree, but have gone to law school entirely online. There is one law school right now that is entirely online. The only problem with that law school, not the only problem, but it's the biggest problem, it's not ABA, American Bar Association, recognized. And so on Guam, in order to sit for the bar exam on Guam, you have to have gone to a ABA recognized school. And right now, the online law school is not recognized. However, California will let you sit for their bar. So if you sit for you don't even have to go to law school. If you just say, sign me up, I want to sit for the bar, you can. And if you pass, you pass, right? But that doesn't mean that law firms are going to hire you, right? The government will. But so let's say if you go to law school totally online here on Guam, I'm just trying to do a hypothetical. You go to law school here online on Guam, you go sit for the bar in California and get licensed in California. You can come to Guam and for 8 years, under a California license or any other state license, for 8 years you can practice on Guam. But then eventually you're going to have to take the Guam bar if you want to go beyond 8 years. But Guam doesn't recognize law schools that are not ABA. And there's a few. I think Puerto Rico is not ABA recognized. And I think University of Las Vegas is also not ABA recognized, because they're only about 10 years old and they don't have their ABA accreditation yet. So I'm not sure, but that's what I recall. So what other professions or fields are you guys thinking about? Trades, we need people in trades, but we also need more doctors. Do you know what's the most highest paid government of Guam job? Let me throw that out as a trivia question. What is the highest paid government of Guam job? Anybody know?
The mayor's office.
No. I heard it. Yeah. The chief medical examiner. About 400,000 a year. There is a Chamorro guy that went to medical school, I want to say about 5 years ago now. He left Guam and went to medical school. But he was saying that he wants to come back and be the chief medical examiner, but he's got a few more years till he can reach that level of, because you got to have like multiple medical degrees for that. It's a lot of schooling. And I know some people don't like school like me. I skipped school a lot in high school. That's why I thought I wasn't going to graduate. I was busy going with my friends and my girlfriend. But I still ended up graduating. I still don't know how I graduated. I guess they just wanted me out of there. Here, boy, go. There's your diploma, go. So, anyone want to be the governor? Yeah, that's crazy. The politics, it's just, I never wanted to be a politician. What I really want, my dream job, is to go be a judge. You know, I really didn't want to be the AG, or I don't, you know, that wasn't my intent to run for AG, but because there's a need, I'm willing to step up to the plate. And that's been my whole life, is things just presented itself, opportunities just presented itself. But I think we're at time. If there's no further questions. Nope. All right. Thank you guys for having me. Yeah, let's go over. Oh, awesome.
With, I believe that's your oath, yes, that you take when you
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes,
We
yes,
make that here.
yes. Thank you.
Okay, real quick, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Thank